The Traveller's Egg. I have already started to write tales of dragons in the moonlight. Experience is a battle of sacrifice, a tale of nightly fights. So with pain and blood, the story starts with a buzz. Atop a hill it sat, the power echoing, with walls of art, a deco sky, a place of healing and warriors' eyes. Many sat looking, never making ties. Countless say its lessons are cruel. To travel to it, you must be a fool. Yet onwards many warriors went, just to take a peek. Yet none come back, they die inside the keep. Then one day a traveller came, needing meat for a stew. He travelled down the road, picking up sticks and stones, insisting it would brew. A farmer called him over, so with haste the traveller ran, greeted the farmer with a smile, saying, "If you need help, I'm your man." The farmer smiled back, gently tipping his hat. "I hear you need some meat. Well, I have a chicken egg, see?" "Oh, please," the traveller begged. "Listen closely," the farmer said. "Wait for this egg to hatch. Here, you can keep it warm in my hat." The farmer started to go on, yet the traveller was distracted by a song. Had he heard this song before? He had to find it, that was sure. He added the egg to his kettle. What sprang forth would surely test his mettle. So into the kettle the egg it went, with the rocks and the sticks, yet it didn't break one bit. If the traveller had looked down, he would have been astounded. Not a scratch on it. Top of rocks it sits, turning red as it warmed its bed. But the traveller was lost in song, thanked the farmer as he skipped along, humming the melody as he went. A myth, grabbing more sticks. The traveller continued down his path, sure it was a song forgotten in his past. He came along an old man, a solid cane in his hand. The traveller smiled and waved. The old man lifted his cane, told the traveller it was about to rain. The traveller looked to the sky. Not a cloud had passed him by. So in a grateful reply, "Thanks," he said, "I hope you stay dry." The old man nodded, then lifted his cane. "I used to pick mushrooms in the rain," and kept walking back from where he came. The traveller's eyes lit. Mushrooms, an egg, rocks and sticks, surely something he could brew with. So forward on the path he went, humming the tune as the egg twitched. A myth, moving forward fast and swift. He must have been walking longer than he thought. What way did he come from? He forgot. He looked behind him to see his path, just a field of open grass. In front of him, corn and wheat, a metal still, perhaps something sweet. He was aware of the sound, eerily quiet, unlike the town. Then all at once a bang! Then cloudless skies started to rain. Yet he wasn't scared or frightened. So many miles he travelled along the roads. He had walked in rain and mud, once almost struck by a lightning bug. So he laughed and smiled. My legs are tired, I'll sit a while. So he took a few more steps, set down his kettle next to the still, sat down and leaned against its metal build. He laughed a little more at his mess, then closed his eyes and took a rest. The kettle he never checked. "This is the night," the scruffy man said. "The old man has left his stead. I saw him walk to town." The other man jumped to his feet, shoving food in his mouth to eat. He spoke, pieces flying around. "I need something to wash this down." The bearded man didn't smile or laugh, just shook his head as he pushed past. "I tell you we should kill that old man. Take his still and his land." The other man turned a little pale. "I'm not stupid enough to test the tale." The bearded man didn't even look. "Yeah, coward in my book." So the two men left. It wouldn't be far, just down the hill, behind the grassy field, in the woods behind the still. They took a few more steps and saw the traveller where he slept. The bearded man didn't wait. He kicked over the traveller and drew his gun. "I'll kill now. This should be fun." The traveller awoke and said, oh please, aim for the head. I lost my way. I'm already dead." The second man, wicked pale, wasn't ready to kill. "Leave him. We're here for the still." The bearded man mumbled back. Then he reached for his flask, kept an eye on the traveller as he opened the tab, his hands shaky, ready to fight. He dropped his flask into the kettle that night. The spout was open, and the sweetness fell into the kettle as well. The bearded man cursed, reached right in, grabbed his flask, and filled it to the brim. The second man had a larger bucket, so he moved the kettle over to stuff it. He started to fill it to the brim. Then somebody shot the two men. The traveller, shocked, looked around. A man there, the one walking to town. The old man walked slowly still, one hand on his cane, the other holding his weapon. He walked calmly to the mess, smiled and laughed, picked up the flask, took a sip, and looked at the traveller he passed. The traveller was lost for words and scared to the bone, this much is sure. He finally got the courage to speak. "I swear I just rested my head to sleep. Oh please, don't kill me. I was wet, tired and lost. These men I've never come across." The old man smiled and waved. "I didn't get wet on my way. See, I took your advice. Thought I'd go to town another night." The traveller finally got to his feet. "What should we do with the bodies?" The old man took another sip from the flask. "Too much work for you or me. Just leave them for the wolves. They'll take care of them, you see." He offered the traveller the flask. "Would you like some tea?" "Oh no, that stuff's not for me," the traveller replied. "Once I saw it kill a guy." He grabbed his kettle. "I'll make my meal, I'll beg and plead, but no, that stuff is not for me." So the old man drank down the flask, handed it over to the traveller he passed. "For when it's done," he smiled and laughed. The traveller thanked him. "I'll keep it safe." put the flask in his kettle to store away. I do have just one favor to ask. Do you know the way to the path? The old man lifted his cane. Think it's over that way. So the traveller onward he went, kettle in hand. A myth, a myth, I have an egg, rocks and sticks. He was whistling when he reached the path, and wouldn't you know it, a mushroom at last. The traveller bent over, picked it up, added it to his kettle with all his stuff. Sticks, rocks, an egg, and a mushroom at last, and, of course, his empty flask. But something else he didn't add. Below the eggs, the rocks and sticks, sweet and still it sat, warming up slowly at that. The tea that fell from that night, as the traveller walked towards the daylight. The morning came at last. Hungry and thirsty, the traveller walked down the path. He came along a travelling stand. The trader's deal. Just on the side of the road stood a young man with a tied bow. Boastful as the traveller approached, "Yes, yes, my friend, I'm the best craftsman in all the land." The traveller smiled and waved, approached the trader with nothing to trade. "Your wares are fine. I love your hat. I'm just hungry. Would you have that?" The trader was taken aback. "Food? I don't sell that. Perhaps a sturdy shield or bow? My swords are real steel, you know." The traveller smiled and nodded. "I have no need for that. If somebody kills me, they stabbed me in the back. Just a piece of bread would do. Oh, please, I'll tell everyone I meet that you're the best craftsman on the street." The trader knew travellers well, and perhaps he could bring him a sale. "Just a piece of bread, you say? Well, I didn't bring my lunch today. But if you do me a chore, I'll give you this knife for sure." The traveller had no need for a knife, yet he accepted the offer to be nice. "What needs done?" the traveller said. "Maybe on my way I'll find some bread." The trader went into great detail. "Down the street, 2 miles exact, take a left at the blueberry patch. You'll see a hut, a chimney to match. An old lady named Sue, that's where she's at. Tell her I sent you. She knows what I need." So the traveller started down the street, 2 miles exact, taking a left at the blueberry patch, and was met by an old lady named Sue. "Good day," she said. "How do you do?" "A good day indeed. Met the best craftsman in the land, you see." The old lady smiled and said, "The cowhide is in the shed." The traveller nodded his head, went to gather cowhide from the shed. The cowhide was heavy and hot. Carrying that and his kettle, he wobbled in stride, waved to the old lady, and said bye. But Sue stopped him in his tracks. "Leaving without blueberries? I can't have that," and dumped a handful in his kettle. The traveller thanked Sue and went along his way, with his kettle and hide, to walk back. Took a right at the end of the blueberry patch. Walked 2 more miles to be exact, back to the trader who still had on his hat. He set down the hide next to the travelling stand. "I told you I was your man." The trader smiled, tipped his hat, handed the traveler the knife. They couldn't stab you in the back with that, as he motioned to the cowhide and laughed. The traveler smiled and asked for a drink. The trader stopped to think. There's fresh water by the bar. About 5 miles, not that far. I go there when I need a sip, and in the bar for a place to sit. Yet none have purchased a stick. The traveler thanked the trader and started to walk. A myth, I have a lot, setting his knife in the kettle on top. On his way he saw other paths, but he was thirsty, needed water to last. So to the watering hole he went. The egg, now blue, it twitched. About 5 miles he walked, to a shaggy old building with a sign. Potions of ale, it read. The traveller stepped into the stead. The place was dimly lit. A few tables had blood on them. But forward he went, greeted with a voice dark and thick. What do you want? The man asked. I was looking for a stream. The best craftsman in the land sent me here, and not a stream did I see near. Yet the man didn't seem to care about the stream. Best in the land? What do you mean? Then pulled his knife that gleamed. The traveller, quick on his feet, said, Wow, what a nice piece! Mine's old and rusty, like me, old and dusty. The bartender scowled. The best in the land. Bet I could break it in two with my own hands. The traveller smiled and nodded. I bet you can't. And if I'm right, how about some water to get me through the night? The bartender laughed. You've got a deal. Now hand me over your flimsy steel. The traveller reached in his kettle, pulled out the knife made of metal. He handed it over as he sat on a stool. The bartender said, Now watch, you fool, and tried to break the sturdy tool. He tried with all his might. The blade wasn't going to break tonight. The more he tried, the angrier he got. He set the knife sideways on the tabletop. The bartender, now red in the face, pulled out his sword from under the bar that day. With all of his might, sword to knife, his sword snapped in two that night. The bartender looked at his sword, then grabbed a glass and poured. He filled that glass to the brim. Where did you say you got that knife again? The watering hole. The traveller picked up his knife, placed in his kettle without thinking twice. I told you, my friend, I got it from the best craftsman in the land. Just down the road, over the hill, past the blueberry field, there is a boy with a bow. He is the best craftsman I know. The bartender grimaced a bit. I'm too lazy to make the trip. The traveller smiled and laughed. I'm glad to help. I'm your man. For a little gold, I'll make the trip. You'll have a sword in your hand. I'll be really quick. The bartender, not the trusting kind, said, Leave me your knife. Not to return wouldn't be nice. The traveller grabbed his knife, but this time he thought twice. This old thing, he said. Without it, I would be dead. I'll take that broken sword for protection instead. and stuck the knife in the table's stead. The bartender waved to the broken sword's mess, a pile of rubble at best. Then he reached into his till, handed the gold to the traveller, who stood still. That should be enough, the bartender spat. The traveller put the gold in his pocket, pieces of sword in the kettle, his drink untouched and never settled. A myth, it's just a broken stick. Down the path, over the hill, past the blueberry field, 5 miles to be exact, there was the trader wearing his hat. The trader looked at his travelling friend. It sure is nice to see you again. That broken sword I can mend. The traveller smiled and waved. These pieces of rubble? You can have them, it's not any trouble. Yet I do have a favour to ask. The man at the bar needs a new sword at last. This is all the gold he gave to me. It's all yours. That's what we agreed. The trader counted every bit, all the way up to 56. This one here, usually 60, you know, but for you, I'll let it go. It's not for me, the traveller said. The trader handed it to him and nodded his head. The traveller started back, sword in hand, kettle in the other, whistling along without any cover. A myth, I've got rocks and sticks. 5 miles he walked, to be exact, and arrived at the bar with all that. The place was still dimly lit. His knife in the table still it sat. His full beer at that. He walked past the tables, and there he was, the bartender, dead, covered in blood. The traveller didn't smile or laugh, and took his knife out of the table. Then he sat on the stool, knowing exactly what he must do. He sat for an hour or so before getting up on his toes, then set the kettle on the stool. He would need another tool. Looking behind the bar, in the stockroom, nothing so far. He found what he needed out back, a shovel and a stream of fresh water at that. He spent all night digging that hole, while his kettle sat on that stool, you know. He went back into the bar, grabbed the body and the new sword. He took them out back, buried them both, filled his flask and made a toast. Here's to the bartender who gave me a beer when all I needed was water near. He took a sip of his flask, quenching his thirst at last. The stew's meat. A pumpkin patch and a stump to sit. So he walked down the road just a little bit. He had just reached the stump to sit when he heard a crying fit. Oh, please, help me, please, the voice said in a crying plea. The traveller was fast and quick, moving through the pumpkin patch, swift, leaving his kettle at the stump where he was going to sit. The pumpkin patch was huge. 1.5 miles he ran through. Next to a scarecrow, standing still, was a little girl named Ember. The girl wasn't yelling any more, so the traveller asked to be sure, "Are you okay? I heard you yell." The girl pointed to the well. "I'm sorry, sir. the little girl cried. "I dropped my locket in the well. My grandmother gave it to me. She died last year, you see." The traveller nodded and smiled. "I guess we'll have to fish it out. Is there some string and a hook about?" "Yes," the little girl smiled at last. "Behind the barn there is some string, and as a hook I have an earring." The traveller smiled at her wit. "I'll be right back. I'll be quick." As he walked to the barn, his kettle it sat, and a worm crawled in at that. He grabbed the rope and headed back in tow. A myth, a myth. I'm not fishing for fish. It wasn't long he had reached Ember, holding the rope nice and still, asked for the earring from the little girl. The earring was gold, and it shined as he looped the rope and made a bind. The well was deep, down the rope went, hooking the locket quick, pulled it up without a fit. The locket was still shiny, the earring was covered in mud. The girl was happy and gave him a hug. Thank you," she said. Then she handed him the earring, once in her head. "It's real gold, I promise you, sir. Here, take both, just to be sure." The traveller smiled and laughed. "I'll take the muddy one," he said in kind, "and a place to sit would be just fine." So they sat and talked all night, the little girl telling about her grandma's life. When the sun rose, the girl fell asleep. The traveller got up on his feet. Through the pumpkin patch, about a mile and a half, back to his kettle at last, and there it sat, a blue bird with a worm in it, perched on top of his knife. It swallowed the worm without thinking twice. It looked at the traveller, and it made a sound, the sound he hummed in town. He looked at his kettle just to be sure. The egg had hatched. That was absurd. It has been through the rain, in the cold when darkness came. Yet the egg was cracked, and as blue as a bird the dragon sat, without a name. He couldn't have that. So he thought hard at that, when an echoing scream came again. But this time it quickly ends. The traveller, worried about Ember, ran as fast as he could remember, through the pumpkin patch again, this time followed by his blue friend. He moved fast and quick, and there by the scarecrow she sat, a wolf eating her body at that. The traveller fell to his knees, crying, "Oh, please, oh, please!" Then his bird made a sound, chirping as it moved forward bound. It was tiny, the size of his hand, and the wolf looked up again. The wolf looked at the traveller, a bigger meal for his pack, so he got ready for the attack, growling and ready to leap. The little blue bird let out fire, you see, burning the wolf to ashes and Ember's body. The little blue bird walked through the flames, picked up the locket, and back it came. Ember, yes, that's your name. the traveller said with tears on his face. I see you retrieved your locket. He picked it up and put it in his pocket. The traveller would never forget that day and the exact place he sits. A myth, a myth, I've got rocks and sticks, he said as he wiped his face, set his bird on his hat, and he started to walk away. He knew where he was going. Had he ever been before? Back to the farmer he had to be sure. What kind of bird was this? And how does he take care of it? The Travelling Dragon. The traveller went first to get his kettle, his knife, a full flask, some rocks and sticks. But the egg on his hat it sits. He picked up the kettle, started down the path, his bird chirping at every tree that passed. He wasn't lost, he wouldn't forget. Back to the farmer he went. He walked a mile and a half without making a sound, listening to everything around. He heard the birds chirp, none like his. The wind whistled by, it made a fizz. He saw a lake, he'd missed it before. And there's a toad. Yes, he was sure. 10 miles he walked, to be exact. The only noise, the bird on his hat. He had made it, the farmer's at last. The farmer was tending his coop, feeding the chickens as he stooped. Good day, the farmer said. This is Ember, the traveller replied. The bird chirped with twinkling eyes. The farmer smiled in a curious way. Ember, that's a beautiful name. I've never seen such a sight, or a blue that bright. Where did you get such a thing? The traveller replied, From you, it would seem. The farmer shook his head. I don't know what you mean. The traveller reminded him of that egg he got. Then he showed his kettle. It hatched here. That's the spot. The farmer looked more curious still. I gave you a chicken egg as a meal, and now you want more? Is that the deal? Oh no, oh no, you must understand. I just want to know how to take care of my friend. The farmer replied, A little water wouldn't hurt your friend. But what it is, and what does it eat? I can't help you there, my friend. I only have chickens in my pen. So the traveller took out his flask and gave his dragon water at last. His bird drank about half, when the farmer thought who could help. Cain, he said with a smile, he lives down the road. If anyone, that old man will know. The traveller said thanks, and off he went to the old man who carried a stick. He thought of that night at the still, and the 2 men Cain had killed, wondering if the wolves had eaten the bodies. And he began to cry, clutching his pocket. He walked 3 miles, to be exact, when his bird flew off his hat and sat on a tree branch. That tree branch broke. It fell with a bang, and the traveller picked it up that day. Ember flew back on top of his hat, started to chirp, and they were off with that. He walked down the trail, hearing the rustling leaves, over a bridge, enjoying the breeze. Then passed a man cutting trees. "It's going to rain," the traveller said. The man cutting trees lifted his head. Thanks," was half of his reply, keeping his eye on the clear sky. "I hope you don't get wet," the younger man said, being sly. "Already did," was the traveller's reply, and then the rain fell from the open sky. He continued his travels, him and his cane, his bird on his hat, in the rain. He arrived at the old man's still. Two bodies next to its metal build. Ember, she didn't wait, flew right over to the bodies that day, burned to ashes right where they lay. The metal still melted away, turning blue in its sway. Ember danced in the ashes as play, then flew back, landing on the kettle that day. She pecked at the flask, making a chirp. The traveller grabbed it and opened it for her. He turned it sideways so Ember could drink. She drank almost all in a blink, then perched on his hat to rest a wink. For the first time from that day at the pumpkin patch, the traveller smiled and laughed, then took the last sip of his flask. He looked all through the land, in the corn and wheat, for that old man, shouting his name as long as he can. And then a puff of smoke, the old man's chimney and cottage abode. He walked up to the cottage that day, the door broken in its sway. Mason jars lay on the floor. A fight had broken out for sure. And there lay Cain, dead on the floor, half his walking stick in his chest. He was no more. Ember asleep at bay, the traveller clutched his pocket, and a single tear ran from his face. He couldn't stop it. He found a shovel, dug a grave, buried Cain with a whole branch that day. A myth, a myth, here lies Cain with a stick. His tea I never did sip. Then he cried for a bit. He slept in the field that night. Ember ate a blueberry from the kettle. It was still ripe. They awoke with the morning sunlight. A thirsty friend. As he got up from where he lay, Ember started to peck at his flask. "I'm sorry, my dear. See, there is no water near." He got to his feet, heading to the path. Where was he going? He didn't need to ask. The traveller went onward to refill his flask. Through corn and wheat he arrived at the path. Ember ate a mushroom at last. It was in the same spot he'd passed. He looked in his kettle real quick. Rocks and sticks, his hat, the eggshell, an empty flask, and his knife. He ate no mushroom from that night. The tea spilt had dried up. Onwards he went to fill up his cup. Down the path, over a bridge, hearing the crunch of the twigs. The day was cloudy as Ember chirped. He didn't look to the sky to be sure it wasn't going to rain or pour. That's when he saw the trading stand, and there stood the boy with the bow, striking a deal, wouldn't you know. So the traveller said with boastful stride, "Yes, yes, that's your man. For a knife or sword in your hand, he's the best craftsman in all the land." The trader looked up and replied, "I'll mend that sword today, I will." The traveller smiled and waved. "Don't waste your time. My knife has always done just fine." He walked onward with that, 2 miles to be exact. When Ember flew off his hat, she took a left into the blueberry patch. The traveller saw Sue coming out of her shed. "Good day," he said. "How do you do?" "A good day indeed. I have more blueberries than I need. If you ever need some, you'll know right where they'll be." But it wasn't the traveller she looked at. It was his friend who sat on his hat, the one eating blueberries right out of her patch. Thank you," the traveller said. He walked over and kissed her head. Sue was taken aback. She'd never gotten thanks like that. Ember was finished and flew back, landed on the kettle and pecked the flask. "I'm sorry, my dear. Just a bit longer. The water is near." So onward he went, 3 miles to be exact. Ember chirped along on his hat, and they arrived at the bar with that. Potions of ale, there it was. In the back, the hole he dug. The place was brightly lit, and tables had no blood on them. He was greeted soft and kind. "Welcome. Here's the best potions of ale you'll find." He walked forward a bit to the table where his knife once sat. "I would bet my life you do, yet I'm just looking for water from you." "Of course," she said with a grin, reached under the bar right then. She pulled out a pitcher that night, pushed some buttons on the till. "Would you like a meal?" The traveller pulled out his knife. "Whatever this gets me would be nice." The young girl had no need of a knife, yet she accepted the offer to be nice. "Wow, what a fine piece!" and made the traveller a sandwich to eat. The traveller and Ember sat in the bar all night. The traveller told stories of some old lady's life. When the time came, he filled his flask and started to walk the path, waving goodbye to Jill at last. "When I'm old and dusty, I'll be back." The young lady smiled and laughed. "I have enough stories to last." Ember and the traveller were off with that. The mended sword. He knew where he was going. He didn't forget. Back to the trader to get his stick. The traveller was sure he had mended it. He walked down the path, taking in the changing leaves. 2 miles he walked before seeing Sue, crying on her knees, "Oh, please, oh, please." The traveller didn't say good morning or good day. He walked right over. "Are you okay?" Sue looked up, tears in her eyes. "He was in the shed when the cowhide fell on his head. My little boy Jack is dead." The traveller didn't reply, ran to the shed, and there he lies, Jack dead, covered in cowhide. He moved the cowhide away, and next to Jack a mended sword did lay. The traveller dug another grave that day. Right next to the shed, by a bush, as deep as he could. A myth, here lies Jack, the best craftsman who had my back. He and Sue sat by that grave. Ember ate blueberries and played. Sue told stories of Jack's short life and how she had to teach him everything twice. The traveller left before sunlight, Sue begging him to take the cowhide. So the traveller put it on his back, and off he went with that. Him, his kettle, some rocks and sticks, a full flask, no knife or stick. Ember on his hat she sits. For the first time since the day at the pumpkin patch, he didn't know where to go or who to ask. So the traveller reached for his flask, opened it up, and Ember drank half. Ember chirped and flew away as high as he'd ever seen that day. Past a mountain with a castle high, she sparkled blue against that deco sky. Her eyes brighter than a warrior's eyes, the place where every man dies. She flew back, landing on his brim, chirping the song familiar to him. The traveller knew exactly what to do. Up the mountain he must go, too. The only path he didn't know, up the longest hill at last. He walked and walked up that hill, when met by a bandit ready to kill. "Give me your gold," the bandit said. Ember asleep on the traveller's head. But the traveller didn't stop or plead, just kept on walking, you see. The bandit pulled a knife and tried to stab the traveller in the back that night. His blade snapped in two. The cowhide it couldn't get through. Ember awoke in fright, let out a roar he hadn't heard before. As blue flames lit, the bandit was no more. The traveller looked at the ash, picked up his broken knife, put it back in the kettle that night, and walked until the morning sunlight. A myth, a myth. His legs tired, not knowing how long he'd walked. I should rest my legs, he thought. Ember pecked at his head and squawked. He smiled and laughed. Just a bit further at last. He walked up a bend, and there it was, right then. A gate, and a stone tablet at that. And next to it a place to sit at last. And there it was, the song Ember had been singing, with all of its buzz. He read it as his bird chirped away, humming the words that were lost that one day, the one he heard when he got her egg. A myth, this is where dragons sit. They can be tamed with rocks and sticks. Your swords and bows are ill-equipped. A myth, this is where dragons sit. To enter you need to be well equipped, both wet and dry, I insist. A myth, this is where dragons sit. They'll burn you to ash real quick. The throne is empty and nobody sits. A myth, the door is open, I insist. There's no need to climb the walls and bricks. You're free to sit if you wish. A myth, oh please, enter at your own risk to see. The traveller, no longer tired, walked to the gate, pushed on it as it gave sway, and with that he was on his way. The path was made of gold. Next to it, swords and bows, stacks of diamonds by his toes. Not a body or skeleton near. He walked slowly, without fear, Ember chirping on his hat, when a huge dragon swooped down and blocked his path. The traveller smiled and waved. "Begone! Get out of my way!" Ember roared on his hat. The bigger dragon flew away at that. He walked just a little more. There was the throne room. Yes, he was sure. So he walked a little bit more, up to the throne, but he didn't sit. He set his kettle down on it. He looked at Ember with tears in his eyes, opened her flask as he cried, "A myth, a myth, this is where my dragon sits. It was tamed with rocks and sticks, wet and dry, I insist. I didn't climb over the rocks or bricks. She'll burn you to ash really quick, and here on the throne Ember sits. Oh please, someone help me." He reached in his pocket and cried. He put the locket in his kettle and turned on his heel, leaving her metal. The trip back to town was lonely and quiet, 60 miles to be exact. No bird on his hat and no kettle, just a muddy earring made of metal. "There, that's the man," Sue said, waving her hand. "The one Farmer Bill gave all his land." "I don't know what you mean," the traveller replied. Then Sue told him how the farmer died. He was feeding his pen, stooped over, not to get up again. Before he passed, he clutched his chest. "The land, my chickens, and everything else, I leave to the man that will always help. He left it to you, my travelling friend." The start of the story. The traveller was given the farmer's stead. It was his house under his head. He feeds the chickens, takes care of the land, and is married to the love of his life and is a happy man. The traveller feeds the chickens corn and wheat from a man named Tim, who lives in a cottage down the street. Tim tells everyone who will hear when the rain is coming near, and how to chop a tree nice and clear. The traveller fetches water for his coop down the hill from a lady named Jill. She tends the bar of potions of ale. She tells travellers about a locket and an old lady who carried it in her pocket. The traveller's shovel and his tools he gets from a trader named Sue. She runs the trading stand without a bow. She has the best tools around, you know. Sue tells anyone who trades how the best craftsman died one day. She is never boastful of her craft, and only smiles when the traveller comes past. The traveller has a son. He plays with the chickens and has lots of fun. He's kind and tries to help everyone. Today he is helping his dad, holding his hand as he walks the path. He's on the way to Without a Bow, running and laughing at his dad, walking slow with some eggs. He always enjoys going to Sue's. She is always so kind. She gives him blueberries every time. He likes to play in her patch and catch lightning bugs. He never leaves Sue's without a hug. So the traveller and his son, walking down the path having fun, when the travelling boy, lost in imagination, ran into someone. "I'm sorry, sir," the little boy said. Tim smiled and laughed, but his face turned to dread in a flash. He looked at the boy's father. He had to be sure. "Yes, I know it's not going to rain, but pour," the old traveller said, and Tim was sure. Tim had a single tear on his face. "I'm not ready. I just purchased a new walking stick. Sue whittled it herself. It's a perfect fit." "It's a beautiful cane," the old traveller replied. And with that, the little boy was off who stood beside. They went down the path, up a tiny hill, and made it to Sue's at the blueberry field. Sue was outside her stand without a bow. The little boy ran and gave her a hug, you know. She smiled and waved at his dad. "Good day. How are you?" she said. "A good day indeed. It's my son's birthday, you see. He's not old and dusty like me. I've bought a few eggs to trade." "I picked them myself," the boy chirped in. "That one there, from my own hen. I tried to teach her to fly. She's too chicken." Sue laughed and smiled. "Pick anything you want, my child. But this egg here, the one from your hen, I would never eat your friend." She went to hand that egg back and dropped it on the path at that. It landed on a small pile of rocks, its yolk splashing atop. The little boy laughed. "It's okay. I have plenty of eggs. My hen lays one every day." The little boy looked behind that stand. Swords and shields, knives and tools. There were some flasks, kettles and cloaks, and something he didn't know. He picked it up by one of its straps. "What's this?" he asked. Sue smiled with tears in her eyes. Then she replied, "That's brand new. I made it in my shed. It's called a backpack. You can stuff it full of blueberries when you get them from my patch. You put the straps here, like this." And Sue put the backpack on that little kid. The boy imagined all the things he could add, things he'd seen on the path, not just rocks and sticks like his dad. That little boy knew that backpack was his. It was a perfect fit. It even had his favorite color on it. He gave Sue a hug again. She stooped down to kiss the boy's head. She tripped and fell on the path. Sue was dead. She had fallen right on that egg. Her blood mixed in with the yolk that day. The little boy cried, "Oh, please, oh, please, Daddy, help her, please." The old traveller didn't smile idly by while looking at his son's twinkling eyes. As the boy sat there and cried, the old traveller replied, "I always help when I can." He took off his cloak of cowhide and covered the body from his son's eyes. "If you want to help, we can bury her outside." The little boy didn't move. He sat and cried for an hour or two, tears pouring from his face, making a puddle as if it had rained. The boy's father picked up Sue, carried her body over to her shed. He knew exactly where to place her head. The boy's father grabbed a shovel, sitting sideways against that shed, and went to dig a grave for Sue's head. That shovel hadn't touched the ground when he saw his son forward bound. He still had tears in his face, walking forward slowly in pace. He looked at his father to say, "Can I help in any way?" His father smiled and said, "You use rusty shovels to dig graves for the dead." He handed the shovel to him instead and sat down next to the shed. He told his son of Sue's long life, how she had once made him a knife. He told his son of a boy with a hat, and why Sue never sold that. Now his son would know Jack was buried without a bow. The old traveller's son listened to every word, crying as he dug a grave deeper than Jack's, telling his father he wasn't done yet. He grabbed his father's hand, off to fill his backpack full of blueberries at that. That little boy picked as many as he could, and the old traveller added a handful. The little boy ran back to Sue's grave, took off his backpack, flipped it upside down, spreading the blueberries all around. "Think she would like that?" the little boy cried, asking his dad. The old traveller smiled, nodding his head. "She wouldn't have been surprised. Let's go home with the sunrise." The sun rose over that blueberry field as the boy and his father walked towards the path. The old traveller enjoyed the breeze as it passed, his son carrying his new empty backpack. At the top of the little hill a duck walked by. The little boy walked like the duck down the hill. "Imagine having to walk like that!" He smiled and laughed. They reached home at last. The best sandwich ever. Some time had passed from when the traveller's son made that grave in that blueberry field. When he awoke for his breakfast meal, his mom had made him oatmeal. Thank you," he said. She gave him a hug and kissed his head, poured him some milk and gave him some bread. "After you're done, do your chores," she said. The traveller's son sat and imagined his day, everything he wanted to do while he was eating away. First he had to feed the chickens and collect the eggs, water the plants and move some hay. When he finished that meal, he grabbed his backpack to collect eggs, went outside to feed the chickens, water plants and move the hay. The chickens, plants and hay, they were already done that day. His father had done them instead. And that his father did say, "We are running late," and stood up from where he sat. "Where are we going?" the traveller's son said back. "Potions of ale," his father said. As he walked to the gate, the traveller's son replied, "We could go this way. We made a trail to the stream, me and my chicken, I mean." The old traveller smiled with pride. "Lead the way." So his son did just that, grabbed his hand, leading his father that day, his father smiling along the way. The trail was shorter and had oak trees. Acorns lay on the ground. They even passed honey bees. When they reached the stream, they went around in front. The bar was nice and clean. but Jill was nowhere to be seen. Her father ran the bar today. He greeted them in a happy way. "Good morning. Yes, indeed. Jill is due tomorrow, you see. She's having a girl, naming her Belle, from some old fairy tale, and I'm sure it will fit her well." The old traveller smiled and laughed, then sat down at last. "Well then, a beer for you and me." The traveller's son asked for a grilled cheese. Jill's father grabbed 2 glasses, filled them almost to the brim, with just a little foam on them. "Consider it on me," Jill's father said, then made a toast to family, and they drank. The traveller's son had never seen his father drink, but his grilled cheese was so good he didn't stop to think. He just sat with his dad, listening to stories brink, until his father finished his drink and said, "It's time to go, I think." Jill's dad handed him a jug of water. "I'll need some eggs next week." The old traveller smiled back. "Consider it done." He and his son left with that. Back down the trail by the stream, they were at the honey bees when Jill delivered her baby. The traveller's son never asked that day. He knew he got water from Jill yesterday. Jill had given him a cookie that day, and he gave Jill some of his eggs. So he walked a little bit more down that trail he made, holding hands with his dad, imagining along the way. When they got home, the traveller's son went to play, his empty backpack on display. Imagination brighter than a sun ray, a dragonfly twice its size against his chicken. Oh, if his hen could fly, who would win? Would he have to step in? Until the daylight died. Then he went inside, went to bed, and fell asleep for the night. A chicken has to eat. More time went by as the leaves changed. It wasn't cold, but a windy, rainy day. The traveller's son checking if the chickens had enough hay, watching the lightning bugs in the grass as they play, when his father came out to say, "Today is the day. We must go get extra corn and wheat. Winter is coming, you see." The traveller's son never liked going to Tim's, a grumpy old man if you asked him. Always talking about the rain, never right, it never came. At least it was already raining today. Why at home couldn't he just stay? Yet he didn't complain. Just went and put on his backpack, and then put his father's eggs in at that. Went back to his father to say, "Won't the food get wet along the way?" His father smiled in reply, "It will dry, just like you and I." So they went up the small hill, past the new tobacco field. Used to be a blueberry patch. The bank, they couldn't have that. The bank had sold it, made a pack. The traveller's son shed a tear. Just 2 blueberry bushes left, and he wouldn't take any from there. Then he wondered if that family cared if those blueberry bushes would stay near, and why did they grow tobacco there? Tim already had a tobacco clear. And on they went, down the hill, over a bridge, fighting trolls. The imagination in that boy! Until they arrived at Tim's. Yet there was no corn and wheat. Tim usually left it right on the street. Just a mushroom sat there. The boy's father didn't seem to care. He just kept walking into the clear, past the corn and wheat, to the tobacco near. And then he sat right there. His son followed, standing still. "Are you okay?" he started to say, when his father pointed that day. And there was Tim, hanging from a tree. He had hung himself there, you see. The boy looked up in shock. Tim had hung himself in a knot. The birds, they were pecking away. Next to the tree an axe did lay. The boy, he started to cry. The birds took off in the sky. And his father lit his pipe. "Do you want me to cut down the tree?" The boy didn't reply. He wiped his face and his eyes and walked towards that tree. "It's not too much work for me." He went to chop that tree, and that branch where Tim did hang, it fell with a bang, landing under that tree, and out of Tim's hand a note came, you see. The boy reached out to grab it, but that father already had it, and opened it to read. "To whoever finds my body here, I want to make it clear. I killed that old man Cain. I stole his life and his land, and when he lived I stole his tea. I came one night in the rain after chopping the tree, and I knew my time was close, and hung myself in this tree. Would you just bury me?" After reading it, the boy's father said, "He wants to be left for dead. Instead of burying him, leave for the wolves indeed," and lit the note with some tobacco leaves. Then the traveller started to leave. The boy followed, but he thought, "Why be left for dead and rot?" And he looked at his father indeed. His father stopped, and he thought. When he finally got the courage to speak, he told his son of a night when Cain had saved his life, and how he offered him tea. He told his son what Tim had done, and how the traveller buried Cain right under that tree. And now the traveller's son, he would now know everything in that note, and why his father never drank tea. When the story was done, the traveller laughed and smiled. "I'm sorry, son, I lied to you. Do you want to bury the body?" His son simply asked, "What about the corn and wheat?" Then picked the mushroom where it would usually be. His father replied, "With some luck we will have enough, and not a hen will die." Then his father wiped his eye. His son unclasped a backpack tie, put that mushroom in that night, grabbed his father's hand by the moonlight, and lightning struck a nearby tree, and with that the sun shined, and the rain stopped to be. Up the path, over the bridge, once an old blueberry field, and there a frog did sit. The boy smiled and laughed while hopping down the path, seeing a fly reaching out to grasp, pretending to eat it. He and his father home at last. just a day fishing. It was early morning. The sun gleamed on the pond. The boy and his father waiting for fish to spawn. The old traveller enjoying his day. A bass splashed in the water as play. The boy imagined a whale and a sea monster twice its scale. When the little boy's line snapped, his hook and bait gone at that. "I'll slay that sea monster one day." The little boy smiled and laughed. His father smiled and laughed back, got to his feet to head to the path. His son looked just a tad bit sad. "Can't we stay?" the boy said at last. The boy's father looked at his son's face, his rod, broken line with no hook or bait. "I didn't bring any extra string today," the old traveller started to say, when he began to cry that day. "It's okay, we don't have to stay. We can always come back another day," the little boy went on to say. His father looked back with a straight face. "We'll have to find some string to stay. There might be some over that way," as he pointed through the trees fray. So off the boy went through the trees, past a toad and a frog, you see, followed by his father, walking slowly. He approached a path, slightly overgrown, covered with some grass, a stump next to pumpkins mashed. The boy sat down at last. He waited for his father there, enjoying the wind buzzing past through his hair. The boy's father smiled when he reached his son, seeing him sitting on that stump, knowing what the journey had become. The old traveller walked a little faster, passing his son into the pumpkin pasture. "This way," he said, with all the courage he could master. His son jumped up, running to catch his father from the stump. Reaching him quickly, he grabbed his hand, saying, "Do you know who owns this land?" The old traveller smiled and laughed, and started to tell a tale from the past. He told his son of an old lady named Belle, and how her granddaughter died at the well. He told him of the grandmother's locket. Once he even carried it in his pocket. He showed him an old earring he kept. How the other one fell he would never forget. When he was done with his tale, the old traveller and his son, they were standing at that grandmother's well. The scarecrow was standing still as a spell. The little boy didn't wait. He ran to the scarecrow and hugged it that day. "You must have been lonely," he did say. He walked to a bare spot next to the scarecrow's path, picked up that missing earring at last. He put that earring right in his pocket. "Now we just have to find her locket." Then he picked up a small pumpkin and some old string by the well, and put it in his backpack for a day of fishing at that old well. He ran back to his father, bright as a bell. "Do you know where the locket is as well?" he asked his father with his hand in grasp. The old traveller smiled and laughed, knowing fishing for fish was done at last. "When the time comes we will go up that path," the old traveller replied at last, and headed back about 1.5 miles, reaching the stump where a kettle once sat. The old traveller told his son about Ember the dragon that day at last. Old Ale's Potion. They walked past the lake where they ran out of bait, over the small bridge where a toad does live. Down the path, the traveller's son, thirsty, imagining Ember's past, asked for a sip of water from his father's flask. "I'm sorry, son, I'm out at last." The old traveller smiled and laughed. "We will have to go refill our glass." So they continued down the path. The old traveller enjoying the breeze, when a drizzle of rain touched the leaves. A drop landed on his son's face with ease. "We'd better hurry before it rains," the old traveller started to say. The little boy smiled. "It'll be okay. I'll drink it all away." Sticking his tongue out, he tried to catch the falling rain's array. When they reached Potions of Ale, to refill the flask that drizzling day, the place wasn't bright nor dark. Jill at the counter, with a tear in her heart. She said hello to the little boy, in a sad, quiet tone, thinking of Ale, who had died in his bed at home, a day after Belle's birthday, all alone. "Good day for fishing," the old traveller said. Jill didn't smile, just nodded her head. "What can I get you?" Jill said with a whine. "A potion of ale," the traveller said in kind. The little boy said, "Water is fine." But Jill didn't move, just stood still. Her tears poured against her will. The little boy didn't say much, just went and gave Jill a hug. Jill broke down in her place, fell to her knees, crying away. "My father, it wasn't his time," she went on to say. The old traveller nodded. 2 years extra, I'd say. His sickness was bound to catch him one day. He walked behind the bar, poured Jill half a glass, his self his own to grasp. To ale, his potions and family past. The traveller's son smiled, and, getting water at last, toasted with his father and Jill. The drizzle outside, the thunderous feel. Jill drank that potion down, the traveller a sip before setting his glass down. The boy drank nothing, just put the flask away, gave Jill another hug. "It will be okay. I'll play with Belle one day." Jill finally smiled, tears fading away. His father pushed a button, the till opened with ease. He paid his tab, thanked Jill, set off to leave, his son beside him, thinking of grilled cheese. "I'll bring you some eggs," he said, before stepping out the stead. Taking his father's hand, he moved ahead, down the path, up a hill, past the tobacco field. He turned to the left, down another small hill, to rest his head. When they reached home, the old traveller sat out on the porch at that, lighting a pipe, smiled and laughed. He looked up at the mountain where his kettle sat, thinking of the future and past. Oh please, someone help me." The Mountain's Hill. The old traveller awoke,
more grey hair than the day before. He had plenty of sleep, yet he was still tired for sure. His son, tall as hip, with energetic legs, that child never did sit, always moving without a fit. And today, that mountain's hill, the old traveller must go get his still. His legs already burn, thinking of the thrill. He knew his son was ready, a mountainous appeal. So off they went, without a backstory to fit, off the porch, past the gate, the traveller's son backpack of fate. By the old blueberry field, they met Nate. "Here, here, get your chew, pipe or roll. The best tobacco is here, you know." The old traveller smiled and waved, spoke clearly back in a daze. "Good morning, wonderful day. It sure is good to see a new face. What flavour of tobacco did you say?" Nate replied, gesturing grand, "You must know it's blueberry, my friend. Here, take some spit for free. You'll be back again, you see. Next time, just bring a trading fee." The old traveller smiled and laughed. "I don't like to spit in the grass. Perhaps some pipe tobacco to get me up the mountain pass." Nate didn't hesitate. He moved fast. Reaching in the stand by a pipe of glass, he fetched a small leather bag. Inside the best blueberry pipe tobacco he had. If you smoke it nice and slow, steady and still, it should be enough to make it up the mountain's hill, Nate said with much appeal. The old traveller thanked him in kind. "If you ever need some eggs, that farm down the hill is mine. I always have eggs, you'll find." So the traveller took the leather bag. Just a pinch of tobacco went into the pipe he had. Then put the leather bag in his son's backpack. The traveller's son was already on the move, waving to Nate, bye and adieu, humming a melody the traveller well knew. 5.5 miles they walked through. At Potions of Ale they took a left, up another hill, let's not forget, passing where a bunch of pumpkins sit. If they took a left there, a lake would fit. Yet forward still and steady they went, up another hill, let's not forget, when the melody was broken by a thoughtful titbit. The traveller's son asked real quick, "How big is a dragon? What's its size? What do we feed it? How does it fly?" Imagination growing in his stride. When another traveller was seen, from around the bend and up the hill, voice booming in mountainous thrill, singing a tune to match his appeal. "The door is locked, the gate is closed. I'm too old to climb sticks and stones. My legs are tired, I want to go home." Waving to the old traveller and his son in a begging tone, "Hello, good sir, would you help me, please? I'm not from round here, you see. My village burned down, how you wouldn't believe." The old traveller's son answered in glee, "I'm glad to help. What do you need?" The man looked at his father strange, yet answered in kind all the same. "Oh, dear child, you are so nice. I'm looking for much to ask in life. a place to live for my family and wife. Yet just a little food and water would suffice. The traveller's son replied quick, I always help when I can, and it happens I can again and again. So keep walking down the hill, passing pumpkins on your right of the field. 3.5 miles to reach potions of ale. Stop and grab a bite to eat. Tell them my hen laid an egg last night, you see. When you're done with your grilled cheese, walk straight out the front about 5 miles to the tobacco field. They always have a great deal. Walk a little more past the hill going down to the left, over a bridge, don't forget. You will reach a crop of corn and wheat, or whatever is left. Follow that path. You will reach a cabin you see. It's mine, but you can take care of it for me and provide corn and wheat for my father for free. The man looked at the boy's father to be sure. He was lighting his pipe, and he walked forward once more. I will need corn and wheat next week for sure. And with that they walked towards the bend, the traveller's son lost in his imagination again, humming a melody of his father's lost friend. The Lost Chapter. Onward they went up the mountainous hill, the boy's father lost in stories of will, telling his son how fast dragons grow, along with everything else he knows. Upwards around the bend, walking and talking as friends, they had many miles to go, and what they said is a secret, you know. So the other traveller walked to the bar, 2 potions of ale. It wasn't that far. He was greeted nice and kind, a lady behind the bar drinking wine. Welcome to Potions of Ale. You look thirsty, my friend. Would you like a beer? As she poured a glass of water near. No beer, thanks. I'm afraid I have no gold. A child sent me, you know. He said to tell you his chicken laid an egg, and water was free today. The lady smiled and laughed. A grilled cheese and water. I always have that, back in a flash, and handed the water to the traveller at last. How she made that grilled cheese so fast, he would never know. She was back before he took a sip of water, you know. So the traveller ate his grilled cheese, drank his water, thanked the lady, then he left to leave. He walked straight forward in pace when he finally reached it that day, a tobacco stand without a name, an old man standing with a cane. Always great to see a new face. Come right over. I have the best tobacco, at least some would say. The traveller stopped, smiled and waved. Ah, I wish I could. I have nothing to trade that's good. I passed a child. His father's pipe, it smelled really good. If I had money, I would. The trader laughed and smiled. That child set you down my path. I need some eggs next week at last. Take some free pipe tobacco. It should last. The old traveller looked taken aback. Free tobacco? No one did that. He thanked the trader as he took a bag, and forward he went down the path. Past a path to a small hill on the left, Forward still, he wouldn't forget, reaching a bridge where a frog does live. Feeling the breeze, the crunch of the leaves, already tired, he needed to rest. Yet a path there to the left, so he took it and followed it still. It bent to the right through the corn, past the wheat to a cabin's field. It was built for a storm. When he finally reached the door, it swung open with ease. The place tidy and clean, fireplace stacked like a king's, just big enough for a child and queen. And that's when we arrive back on top of the mountain, following our travelling child at last, him and his father at the top, reading a myth we haven't forgot. A new story. The old traveller tired, knowing how long he'd walked. Let me rest my legs, out loud he thought. His son, nodding his head a lot, gesturing to a place for his father to sit, he stopped. As his father sat, a little bit further the child walked up to read a stone tablet he had to see. And there it was, that melody. His father lit his pipe. What does it say? So the boy chirped the words away, reading slow and steady with play. A myth, this is where your dragon sits. She was tamed with rocks and sticks. A myth, this is where your dragon sits. Trough, wet and dry, though just a kid. A myth, this is where your dragon sits. She can fly over the rocks or bricks. A myth, this is where your dragon sits. She'll burn your enemies real quick. A myth, this is where your dragon sits. And here on the throne, Ember sits. A myth, this is where your dragon sits. You're welcome here, like town to be clear. Oh please, hug and squeeze. The old traveller smiled and laughed, enjoying the taste of the blueberry's rasp, reading it for himself just for a laugh. The door is locked, the gate is closed. You're too old to climb sticks and stones. Your legs are tired. You should go roam. A myth, no one is home. Then pointed to the gate, just past the tablet stone. Let's see if anyone is home. I'm too old to open the door on my own. The traveller's son reached to open its will. He might have touched it with his appeal. The gate swayed and opened with thrill. The path was made of gold. Next to it, pumpkins and blueberries, stacked in diamonds reaching his toes. Not a body or skeleton, if you wanted to know. The boy walked, imagination in hand, his father humming across the land, when a dragonfly crossed the boy's path. "Move before I slay you," he laughed. It flew away real fast. His father's tobacco gone at last, he saw the throne room just down the path. Just a little bit more, he made it for sure. On the throne, kettle and locket once more. When that child heard a mountainous roar, and Ember landed on the throne floor. The brightest blue the boy had seen, her eyes sparkled like her wings, just big enough to fly, it would seem. She looked at the old traveller with a gleam. The boy wasn't scared to the bone. It was his after all, he'd already known. The perfect fit, bluer than Sue's back patch stitch. He knew he had to have it. But first he gestured to a place to sit. Here, father, let me help you. I know your legs are tired and need a place to rest. He took his father's hand, pulling him forward in breast. He grabbed the kettle, locket in hand, helped his father sit atop the land. Looking at the bird, speaking again, I hope you don't mind. He likes to sit. He's told me about you as if you were his kid. As his father sat on the throne, he had never felt less at home. He already knew he wouldn't stay. He had a home and eggs to sell away. Ember, she chirped and pecked, looking around. The boy's backpack, back to the kettle, her locket. She didn't wait, she moved real quick. Around the back to the blue stitch. It was cowhide and a perfect fit. It had 2 straps on it, sturdy made. They wouldn't budge or quit. So Ember pecked at it. The boy spun round in a flash. I see you like my backpack. The blue bow, that stitching will last. I picked it myself, a story of the past. Ember squawked a bit and pecked again at its sip. The boy took it off and opened it. Inside, a pumpkin and mushroom at last, and a small empty leather bag. The backpack flipped upside down, everything right there on the golden ground. Ember ate that pumpkin real fast. She pushed the mushroom over, filling a bare spot in the grass. The boy put on her backpack, a saddle at last. Ember, ready to adventure above the path. That boy climbed on Ember's back, holding onto his sturdy backpack. He smiled at his father and laughed. A flying chicken, a dream from the past. The old traveller's trip back, all alone again for shore. 60 miles he walked, singing from the core, a thunderous melody once more. A myth, this is where dragons sit. They can be tamed with rocks and sticks. Your swords and bows are ill-equipped. A myth, this is where dragons sit. To enter you need to be well equipped, both wet and dry, I insist. A myth, this is where dragons sit. They'll burn you to ash real quick. The throne is empty, yet someone sits. A myth, the door is open, I insist. There is no need to climb the walls and bricks. You're free to come in if you wish." As he smiled and laughed, Ember and his son flew over the pass. The old traveller's son, a dragon at last. Holding his kettle and locket, he moved fast. At potions of ale he went round the back, took a trail his son had hatched. Enjoying the wind on his back, past the honey bees, home at last. By his gate, a bag of corn and wheat, some pipe tobacco you couldn't eat, 3 jugs of water, and some tea. He walked right past and hugged his wife, you see. A new story.